It's a pleasure tonight to have Ute Brandenburg, who is going to talk about using DNA matches to find a German hometown. I actually saw this talk at the Iowa City Genealogical Society, I think in February for their meeting, and thought this would be of really strong interest to this group, and asked her if she would come share this presentation with this group, and I think you'll find it as interesting as I did. And just to sort of put on your radar, we will be meeting through the summer, and I have the goal of sort of making this an educational summer, and so summer school. And so for June, I have the plan to do a DNA interest group on clustering DNA relatives into family lines. And so this is using the various tools available in the variety of different direct-to-consumer tests to cluster those relatives to define them in particular family groups. And I'll go through some of the sort of simplistic methods of shared matches, the more complex methods such as MyHeritage, now auto-cluster analysis of your matches, go through those different tools that are available to do that clustering. And then in July, I plan to do a program on DNA segments to sort of continue the summer school theme. And so I hope to see you the fourth Tuesday of each month here at the Iowa City Public Library from 6 to 7 p.m. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ute Brandenburg, who's going to give tonight's presentation.
So I feel like this would be something I should come to, your summer class. Because I still have a lot to learn about DNA. This is something I've fairly recently started integrating. So well, first I need to say, though, Iowa City is a cool place. I assume most of you are genealogists, but there walks in my friend from my music part of my world and my friends from my rowing part of my world. So everyone's here I have these different interests, and there's someone from all of them is here tonight. So thanks for coming. I am a professional researcher with German focus. So I've done that for quite a while. I love old German records. I help people trace their families back to Germany. I search in German church records. I build trees. I tell stories. I do the old stuff. And I've been doing this for a long time. And this is something, at first, actually, I said, well, this came up on my Facebook feed maybe 2 weeks ago, that I had posted in 2016, okay, I broke down, I'm getting a DNA test. It's not going to surprise me, nothing's going to come of it. And then, of course, everyone, ha, 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 because now I got really, got very interested in it. And there were no surprises in my family, but boy, did I learn a lot, and I got hooked. So I'm a budding genetic genealogist and a very experienced traditional genealogist. I will be walking you through how this case specifically was solved. Before the Schulze case, I have added one easier case that it highlights a bit of a different way of using DNA to answer questions about German heritage, just a different application. Both these cases are from 2018. The first one I solved was this one with DNA in February of 2018. I've solved 6 difficult cases since with the help of DNA. One has not been solved. We're going to see, but many that I tried, that I applied my method to, have actually been solved through it. And this application of DNA has only become possible now that testing for genealogy has reached a critical mass. This would not have been something, at least as you will see for this case, that I would have been able to do 5 years ago. This approach that I use requires intermediate level understanding of genetic genealogy, but a very high level of experience with traditional methods, and specifically knowledge of how and where to find German records. So I don't know if you guys, there might be some people here who don't do German genealogy. A lot of it's going to be about German genealogy. That's what I do. So one of the big challenges with German immigrants is to figure out where they were from. How do I apply DNA to origins research? I kind of said this already because I was talking freely. Now it's in my notes here. So my principal work is in traditional records. What I'm doing here is at the intersection of traditional research with DNA. I have found it to be a powerful addition to my research toolbox. It cannot stand alone in this kind of work because the relationships we're looking at are too distant, so DNA cannot prove anything in itself, but it can give me added evidence. It can point me to places to look. DNA research will not succeed without thorough paper traditional record research. It can provide additional evidence to conclusive research, and I will show that with my first example. It can point us to a place where we then search paper records, which is how the Paul-Schulze case worked. Wait. Genetic genealogy is I don't always talk to crowds of experts. It can be very intimidating. It is very technical, as you know, probably more so than I do. But to do what I do here, you do not need to have in-depth knowledge of advanced DNA methods. You have to have an understanding of certain patterns and of certain logic. What you do need is this vast experience in German research. So I'll talk a little bit about the basics of German research for those of you who do not have this in your background. When we're trying to find out where someone was born or where someone lived in the United States, what is one of the first records we would look at? Census records, right? Census records, the same for every state, easily available. Well, there are no nationwide census records in Germany. Instead, the primary source of genealogical research in Germany are church records and civil registration records. And these are specific to a location. You have to know where the person lived, where they were born or died, to be able to find them in the records, because you have to look at that specific church. But unfortunately, once they came to the US, often in the records, it'll just say they were from Bavaria. Well, Bavaria has thousands of churches. That limits it, but not enough for me to know where to look in Germany. So that is often what researchers run into, is taking that leap into Germany and realizing that they need to figure out the town and how to do that. Is that a tornado warning?
I hate that noise. Yeah, it happens every day.
Yeah. Okay, if it actually is a tornado like Friday night that came within a mile of my house, let me know, but otherwise, you know.
The lights will go off.
Okay.
The safe room is right across the hall. If they call us, I will come in and get you.
Okay, okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Another challenge in German research is that Germany, as we know it today, did not exist in the time of your ancestors. Germany was founded, the Second German Reich, in 1871. That's when it first became one country. Before that, it was an ever-changing patchwork of smaller to medium-sized principalities and kingdoms, and it kept constantly shifting through wars and history. So that makes it very difficult to know where to look also, and the type of record keeping that you'll see in different states varies quite a bit. So Württemberg, for example, kept pretty good emigration records. If your person came from there, good chance you might find an emigration record. If they came from West Prussia, No such thing. So the records really vary by state. That's one thing that makes it difficult. Significant loss of territory in 1945. Your ancestor might come from a town with a lovely name, and you're sure you have good information, that's where they were from, but you can't find that town on a map today. Well, chances are that town is now in Poland, or in Russia, or in the Czech Republic, because so many areas, the biggest area is Poland, but there are actually quite a few areas that were ceded to other countries after Germany lost the war in 1945. And those towns now have Polish or Czech names. And of course, those records sometimes are also in Polish or Czech archives. Some record loss, especially in those eastern states. So we deal with that in Germany. There's not so much in the West, but with the turmoil that happened when the Russians invaded, or, well, who invaded who is another story, but war is bad for all sides, so a lot was lost. And as I just said, many records in those areas are actually only accessible in Polish archives, and in some areas also in Germany, like in Bavaria, there are vast areas where they just won't digitize because the Catholic Church doesn't want to do it. They don't want this to become public. So we have a lot of challenges here that make it difficult for us to find our ancestor. And for that reason, the place of origin is most likely to be identified in US records or in passenger records. And sometimes you don't find it. Obituaries, newspapers, naturalization records, maybe it just says Bavaria on all of them. So that's where our approach comes in. To succeed, I'll say this again, thorough traditional paper trail research must precede the application of DNA. Even if you didn't find the hometown, the more you know about the stations of the ancestors' lives, about their family members, the more likely DNA is going to help you connect it in the correct way. And a solid understanding of the German history of that time is really important as well. So what ways can I use DNA in searching for the German connection? The first example I'm going to show you is we had one record that looked like it was the ancestor, and that was the only one we could find, and that was just not sufficient evidence to tell us for sure that we'd found the right family. So we found him in a census record, but that was not enough to really prove our case. DNA helped us. There might be relatives that you haven't found yet and don't know about that would help you in your research, maybe a cousin who came to the next town and you just for whatever reason haven't made that connection that there was a cousin in the next town, but through DNA you might be able to identify this cousin. Then you can research them. If you didn't succeed with your ancestor, maybe you'll find the hometown for this cousin. And finally, and this is my Schulze case, provide a path to trace previously unknown, more distant relations to their place of origin. So there's family out there somewhere. Maybe there are third cousins that also came to America. If we can identify them through DNA matching, they may just help us solve a dead-end case. So this is kind of a last resort. It can be very difficult, but it can work. I think I put this down a little too often, but it needs to be said. It does not, DNA in itself does not prove anything, but it guides you to new research possibilities in paper records. So this is where this crowd is going to know a lot, but some people I talked to haven't heard much about it. Why? What are some basics of, so I'm using autosomal DNA testing on Ancestry. I'm just going to talk about that a little bit, what that means. I focus on Ancestry mostly out of time constraint because I am a traditional researcher. I do not want to spend 50 hours on a case using all my possible avenues for DNA. So I start with Ancestry. I have taken one case a little further, but usually Ancestry is all I need. Why Ancestry? By far the largest database of testers. It instantly connects me to records. And autosomal DNA is just the most useful type of DNA for us to work on these kind of cases because it's equally, more or less equally inherited by all children of a family and passed on in predictable percentages so we can make estimates about relationships. So we hope, what we're looking for is we hope that someone related on another, possibly unknown line happens to have tested, and through their match we can figure out how they connect. So the more matches the better, although recently I found that not necessarily to be true, because when someone has ancestors who have been in the United States for a long time, colonial ancestors, they have thousands and thousands of matches, and they really get in the way of finding the few German matches I'm looking for. So that can actually be a problem sometimes. Oh, I forgot to click my little points here. So we said that. Inheritance pattern of atDNA is the most useful to my research goal. Show estimated distance of relationships. Oh, so you inherit 50% from your mother's DNA and 50% from your father, right? So you inherit 25% from each grandparent, right? 12.5% from each great-grandparent? Not necessarily, because it's random recombination. So this is why you don't look like your brother. The 50% you got from your mother are not the exact same 50% that your brother will have gotten. So while you have 50% from each parent, and they have 50% from each parent of theirs, because of how randomly those 50% get chosen, you may not have exactly 25% from a grandparent. And as you go further back and you get to where you only have 3% DNA from someone, it's possible you didn't get any of them at all. So once you get beyond second great-grandparents, it is possible statistically that you would not have inherited DNA from an ancestor, which is one reason we want to test siblings, or even better, cousins, because they might have inherited different DNA from the ancestor you're looking for, or even may have inherited something you did not receive. And I have this little chart. Wait. Just for visualization purposes of what I just said, if those 25% from, let's say this is you on the left here, I can use my cursor. This is your father. This is your paternal grandfather. He gave 50% of his DNA to your father, but the way that this DNA is randomly located on the strands of DNA, it is possible that you got 22% from him, not 25. And you might have gotten 28 from the grandmother. So this is, the further back you go, the more likely it is that you did not inherit a predicted number of DNA. So my first example, William Frederick Steinfeld. We have him here with dates, but we didn't know these dates when we set out. We knew he was born about 1875, probably in New Jersey. Later in his life, he lived in Indiana, then Ohio. He is the grandfather of the person I was working with here, so his granddaughter had taken the DNA test. She had done, with the help of someone else, this research. This is kind of a comparison of what US records had told us about him. So there's birth dates first of all, the spelling of his name varied quite a bit. This would be an anglicized version of a German name, Stein with I-N-E, Steinfeld, Steinfeld. As a German researcher, I think the name is going to be Steinfeld, and I know how that's spelled, but I was wrong, as we'll find out in a moment. We have a variety of ages centering around 1875. Birthplace, there's some contradiction here, but most sources say New Jersey. One says Germany, so we're pretty sure there's German ancestry there, although we don't think he was born there. But none of the places tell us none of the records told us his parents' name. We knew nothing about siblings. We knew nothing beyond likely New Jersey for place of birth. This guy had left his hometown and never looked back, never talked about his family. So we looked at the census records and found the census in New Jersey. This was a good-looking, for our purposes, record. Alvinia Steinfeld in Elizabeth, Union County, New Jersey. She is a widow, and she has children Charles, Frederick, August, Otto, and Frederick W. Can you see that there? Is that clear enough? Yeah. So she has a number of sons. The youngest son is born in New Jersey, the second youngest in New York, and everyone before that was born in Prussia. Frederick W. is the right age for what we're looking for. He's the youngest son, which, could work out for him having left home eventually and not looked back. The siblings, we'll just note this because this is actually interesting later. The siblings worked at Singer's, which is a sewing machine factory. And this brother, August, was not working because he was suffering from consumption. So it's good to note these little details because you will be surprised how that can help you in your research. We also noted that there was quite a space between the second child listed here at age 22, no, the third at age 20, and then the fourth child at age 12, and then the youngest at age 4. So we assumed that probably some children had died. So we thought this was the guy we're looking with, but is it genealogical proof? Does it meet our standard of proof? No, because it just happened to be the only record that fit the bill, but we wanted more proof. We couldn't find more proof. So Frederick Williams' granddaughter took the DNA test, and I searched for Steinfeld. Searching for a location wouldn't work because, well, I guess Elizabeth Union, New Jersey might have worked, but that's already confirmation bias because we don't really know that that's where he was from, right? So Steinfeld, no matches. What are we going to do now? Spelling variations. And we tried a bunch of spelling variations and nothing came up. We're expecting to find something in the second to third cousin range based on how the testers related to Frederick William. Steinfeld. Now, I happen to see in her matches that name with an S. That's not something I would have thought of right away as a phonetic match, but it is German. That's where we found them. So for the spelling Steinfelds, we found 4 matches, 1 third cousin, 2 fourth cousin. And you need to know that Ancestry's relationship estimates are very conservative. These could well be second or third cousins. And what really mattered is they all matched each other. So that meant that I was looking at the surname through which they were likely connected. So here they are. 3 of them had a private tree. Now, when you have a private tree, it doesn't mean you have to give up. You can try to contact those people. But luckily, here, one of them here, we'll call her Christine, had a public tree with 321 people in it. So let's see what that tree looks like. So right away, I see on the bottom her maternal family is all Italian. I know that this is why it's good that I did my good paper research. I know that the test taker does not have Italian ancestors, so I could immediately ignore these. But you always look at the tree, even if you think you know what you're looking for. Get an idea of what you see here. So there's ethnicity here that we're not interested in. Up here, Robert Allen White, Charles Frederick White. That sounds English, but White could be an anglicized version of a German name. So, if I didn't already know that I had this match with Steinfeld's, it's kind of obvious, but I didn't already know that. I might note that if I was just examining the tree, that could be a connection. O'Connor, not German. So here we have Victor Edwin Steinfels and Charles Steinfels. Victor was born in 1890, so if this is a connection, Charles would probably be the person we need to look at. And there are more generations here. Christine is Charles is her second great-grandfather. So if this is the right connection, we would expect this would be a second cousin twice removed. So let's see what she has in the tree. So we were really lucky. This is actually an easy case. This is what she has in her tree for Charles. She doesn't know his parents, but she has a birth of a son in Elizabeth Union, New Jersey. Okay, this looks really promising. He was born in Germany in 1855. Let me go back to the census record. Yes, the oldest son, Charles, this age estimates to a birth of about 1855. So I think I found what I'm looking for. But now I do paper research. So now I go back. I research Charles and his family. I build a tree for him. And I learn as much as I can about this family. Before I do that, this is DNA Painter. I'm sure you're familiar with this tool. If you work with DNA a lot, DNApainter.com, I believe. You can put in shared centimorgans, and it'll give you the possible relationships. So my test taker here, who is the granddaughter of William Frederick, she shared 42 centimorgans with Christine, and I wrote in these names in the charts to visualize it a little bit. William Frederick is her grandfather. Now, if Charles is William Frederick's brother, and Christine, the match, was the second great-granddaughter, a second cousin twice removed, then this is the average DNA, 74 average shared DNA, but as you know, it can vary a lot. The range should be within 0 to 261 centimorgans. With our 42, we were right in that range. So this told me that, yes, what I found out with the records matches the expected relationship by DNA. So I dug in, did the paper research. Now that I knew the family, the flood walls opened, and I found them in New York. I found the father's name, and once I had the information, I did not have a town yet, but I knew who the immigrants were. And I just have to share this here because it's so exciting, put the father's name in Google Books in Germany. Google Books is an amazing tool. You have to know a few keywords that work. But actually, all I put in is Karl Steinfels. In German newspapers are online, and I found this little blurb in It's a newspaper that was digitized from 1860, I believe. I need to add that here. And this little blurb says that the cutter, so someone who worked with knives and blades, Karl Steinfels, was missing and was accused of money fraud. He had disappeared. Well, this was the exact same time we found him on the passenger record. So, remember how they worked at Singer's sewing machine factory? The town where it says that he was from Wippe, oh yes, here's the date, 1860. So it says he lived in Wippe. Well, we look at Wippe on the map, we find it is right next to Solingen, which is a town in the Rhineland, and every German knows that that is the center of German blade making. Historical Center of German Blade Making. So he was a cutter, someone who made weapons or blades or knives. And when they came to the United States, so this is the real interesting added evidence. It carries over. They were working in the sewing machine factory. Remember the consumption? And I had found, once I did the paper research, that a lot of family members died of lung disease. Well, that is one of the occupational hazards that cutters, people in this kind of industry, faced because they were constantly inhaling the dust from the grinding stones. So it's called silicosis or silicotuberculosis. It was rampant in this group of workers, and it was contagious. So even Carl Friedrich's children, didn't mention that at first, but the generation just one before my client, they had tuberculosis. So they brought that to America with them. So the socioeconomic medical evidence is really interesting here. Would I have found these records without DNA? Possibly, if I trusted that census record that I had. And then I would have also seen the medical so, you know, it might have worked. But DNA proved that I was on the right track. So that was an easy case. Paul Georg Otto Schulze. Again, we have a date for him. But when we did this research, we did not know his exact date of birth or death. We knew he was 30 years old in 1904, so we could estimate. We knew that he had been killed in action in World War I, 1914 to 1918. We did not know his middle names either. We knew Paul and we know Schulze. Paul did not emigrate himself. His son, who was a single child, came to the United States in 1929, long after his father's death. Paul's son, Karl Heinrich, is the father of Barbara, who took the DNA test. So this is her grandfather we're looking for. All lines in Barbara's family are German, but we didn't know of any immediate family that had emigrated that she was aware of. We think that her father, Karl Heinrich, was an only child. Her DNA yielded no match for the surname Schulze, which is a really common German surname, so that was almost a little surprising. So we're hoping that somewhere, some cousin of this man, maybe a second cousin, who we never knew existed, he might have not known this person existed, came to America, had a family, and someone tested the DNA who's going to show up as a match. We hoped, but we wouldn't know where that person would have lived. We expected a lengthy process with some trial and error. What we knew about Paul, this is important just to understand where we're coming from. We already said, born in 1873. He did not emigrate himself, so we had no immigration records to work with. That limited it. Killed in World War II. His son emigrated. The son was born in Thuringia in 1903 to unwed parents, and the birth record, which we did have, said that the mother lived in Berlin, but the father lived in Köslin, which is a town that is now in Poland, in northern Pomerania. And they did not live in this town in Thuringia, so the birth record was cool to have, but it didn't help us in finding where the parents were from. There was an amendment on the birth record a year later that said that the parents had married in London. So we got the birth record from London. Which is really cool, except for that the marriage record. Those records really don't give a lot of information, so that was kind of too bad. We think, as far as we know, the son was a single child. Paul's wife was Jewish, and we did find out where she was from, and a lot of research was done on her. And she later lived in Berlin. So this is what we knew. These locations are all over the map. This is where he was born. This is Berlin, where the mother lived at the time. This is where the father was living and working at the time. This is where they got married. This is really uncommon. Most German immigrants that we study in the late 19th century were farmers and lived in the same place. So that actually suggests some things about this family already. They probably were not farmers or just laborers. It is possible, so this is a modern map, by the way, just for easier orientation. It is possible that the mother was sent away from her hometown because she was illegitimately pregnant and was sent to some doctor they knew there to give birth. This is what the marriage record from London looks like. Really neat little record, but it tells us nothing. It tells us their age, and it tells us their fathers' names and what their fathers did, but not where they lived. So when you have Paul Schulze and Karl Schulze, that's not helpful in German. That's like John Smith, right? I did actually investigate the witnesses who are on this marriage record, and it turns out they were just the proprietors of the boarding house where they were staying. Yeah, Paul Schulze, John Smith. So this was a dead-end case. We had no exact birth date. It was impossible to locate him, name this common in indexed records. Actually, it turned out his birth record was indexed in Ancestry, but so were 10,000 other Paul Schulzes. Without an exact date was not possible to find. We had no US or immigration records to work with. We had a family on the move. The marriage record was limited, very limited in its information. Now, Köslin, that was kind of a hint where the father lived. But that town's in Poland. Those records are not online. If some of them are lost, the ones that do exist are in a Polish archive. And I had a feeling that they probably didn't live there anyway because they were moving around. So Barbara, who took the DNA test, it's interesting to note that both her parents were first-generation immigrants. So we didn't expect her to have any close relatives in the United States. Her mother came from a German settlement in Russia, Ukraine, on the Black Sea. Those were Germans who had kept... Okay. Yeah, we're not...
Librarian probably should come get us if it's real.
So these Russians, they were German also, but they'd lived in that settlement in the Ukraine for probably about 3 generations, so that was helpful. We were able to sort those out. In some ways, the odds were stacked against us because we had a single ethnicity for the whole tree. There was no Italian where we could say we know that's not it. There were no immigrants that our ancestor would have known, and we had this common surname. But one thing we had going for us was the Jewish ethnicity of his mother. We could eliminate anyone who had significant Jewish ancestry as probably very likely related to the mother. And people ask me why, and you know the answer to this if you do a lot of DNA, but people ask me why is a religion show up in your DNA? No, it doesn't. It's because they had very isolated populations for many centuries, so their DNA varies because of that. But the religion is not in the DNA. This is what Barbara's ethnicity estimate looks like. So ethnicity estimates, and this is the beginner thing. People get their DNA results, they see this, and they say, oh, that's not right. They're just estimates, and especially in Central Europe, can be very unhelpful to your research, unless the one case we have here. But that it's Eastern Europe and Russia really didn't help us at all. Just kind of confirmed what we already knew. So in examining the DNA matches Barbara had, it was important to understand a little bit of the historical setting. So we knew from the marriage record that Paul's father was a customs secretary, and Paul was a land surveyor. These are mid-level government positions. These people were a little better off. They could move around. They were not farmers or laborers. They were in the middle class. In the 1870s, a period of rapid expansion of Prussia, this likely meant that they had a military career. Prussia was expanding in size and power, and anyone who wanted to get anywhere needed to serve in the military, and it was a very big deal. Government position in Köslin meant that the family were Prussian citizens, or they would not have been able to work for the government. And as I already said, on the maternal side, we did have Germans, but we knew that they had been in the Ukraine for a couple generations, and the immigrants from these German settlements predominantly came to North, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. So any match that we found that lived in Kansas was already kind of a hint that they probably were related on the maternal line. So this shows you that good historical information is really helpful in understanding what you're looking at in your DNA matches and their trees. Narrowing it down. So when I first did this research, I had about half the matches to work with that she has now, because so many more people have tested, and we did not have the new ancestry features with the nice little colors for coding groups. So I have updated this, but I didn't have that originally to work with. There were no fourth cousin matches or closer with the surname Schulze. I was able to eliminate the maternal matches through surnames and locations, or some of them at least. Eliminate matches with significant Jewish ethnicity. You always examine the shared matches and the shared matches of the shared matches. You're looking for groups that are interrelated to each other, and sometimes as you go through that, you will find new ones that weren't matching the first person, but matched a little further down. The most useful matches, of course, are those with public trees or those that have shared matches, although you always want to take a public tree with some caution. Not everyone's research is sound, but it can certainly help you, give you an idea of what you're looking at. Matches with private trees can be useful. Sometimes the username will give you a little bit of information, or it might be searchable. Sometimes you can find out something about these people. Or I have had luck with people getting back to me if I formulate my message carefully, but oftentimes they don't. Not useful, matches with no trees, no shared matches, no clues at all. We just have to let them go. So this is a little small, but I was trying to get this onto one slide so you could see it. So these are her first, I don't know how many, 10, 12 or so matches. And what I did, now I have color-coded them, I looked for groups. The first one here with an X matched on the maternal line. She was a shared match with this one here, so I know that this one was also maternal, so I could let them go. Number 1, there are 3 people who match each other. Those are the ones I gave number 1. And that was the first because they matched each other. One of them had a tree with 2 people, and that's all I needed. That was the first project I approached in my quest. Some matches I couldn't use. This one here, the third one listed, no shared matches. There were no trees. Had to let it go. Again, no shared matches here. This one here, I'm pointing at it with the cursor, had a little bit of a tree, but just nothing stood out to me that would have helped me. So there's a lot of them you just discard. You could always come back and check later. I have a small number 2 way down here. I was really intrigued by this match because they had an awesome tree. I could tell right away where the German was, and I thought, ooh, this one's going to solve it. So that was my second project that I eventually abandoned. And finally, number 3 is the one that solved it, this lady named Rochelle. I have her permission to use her name. She's kind of excited what happened. She had a partial tree with German lines. So I know it's a little hard to see, but just wanted to... Barbara has very few DNA matches. This is kind of unusual. Most people will have a lot more at this level. But because she was the child of single-child immigrants, that's what we were working with. So number one, I told you had 2 people in a match. This is all they had, 2 people in their tree. Why was this enough for me to work with? It's a 48 centimorgan match, so probably 3rd or 4th cousin, because there is a name of someone born before the 1940 census. So I could look up, and it's a pretty unusual name, I could look him up in the 1940 census, which I did, and then I built a tree for him. His wife was in it too. This is the tree I started building. His wife, Delma Lou, no German in her ancestry. Mr. Gwinnup's father, Gwinnup's not German, Earl Babcock, yeah. So I don't get too excited about that. I just say, okay, can ignore it. But the mother, Elizabeth Böttcher, very German name. Böttcher is actually a very typical Eastern German name. And I thought this was my first approach. I thought this is going to solve it for me. They lived in Chicago. I found her parents' names. I found her grandparents' names in one line. And then I got stuck because I'm working online. I'm at home at my desk, okay? Could I have solved this? Sure, I could have gone to Chicago or written to some archives. I could have gathered some records. I could probably figure this out, but I tabled it. I said, okay, I'm stuck with this one. I want to see what I can figure out just at home. So this one was tabled. And I still don't know because we've not needed it. It would just require some more in-depth research than I was willing to do at that point. Second project, I put this up again. That's my match down here, BO are his initials. Now his tree looks like this. It's only a 26 centimorgan match, but this is not German down here. This is very German up here. The Brian Martin Offner. Actually, the test taker is female. This was an unlinked tree, but the DNA test was for a male named BO, so I think it was him. He's the tester. His mother was from England. His father was of German descent, and their dates, this looked like really good research, so I got to work and I was very excited. I thought, I'm solving this case today. Found them in Württemberg. That should have tipped me off because Württemberg is not Prussia, but it was just such a good tree. So I built this tree and I built it back, and Württemberg's fun to research in southwestern Germany. Came up with this wonderful tree and had to realize, okay, I'm in about 1800 now. I don't see anything that's connecting to Schulze. I think what this is probably, in retrospect, is they're related to the maternal line, and because a lot of people from Württemberg immigrated to Russia. But I was blinded by the wonderful tree I saw, and I had to admit, okay, got a little too excited. Let's let that one go. Tried and failed attempt. That's okay. It could also be misattributed parentage in there. You don't know. There are a number of reasons why the DNA could not match what you're finding or just not lead you to what you're working up. But I had barked up the wrong tree. Number 3, Rochelle. She actually responded to my request for information. She had this tree. 30 centimorgans, 2 segments, 3rd or 4th cousin. This is her mother, German name, grandmother, German name. She did not have her father listed, and I asked in my message to her if she had any information, and she said no. So she might not have known who it was, I don't know. But she said he was German, so I knew, 50-50 chance that it's not on this line, but I was interested in it. They lived in Canada. This is what she had on her mother, born in British Columbia in 1958. Father's name was listed as private. Mother's name, not a whole lot, but this is what I did. I took this person and just searched them again on Ancestry, because the tree that someone has linked to their DNA is not necessarily the only tree that has this person in it. So someone else might have done good research on these people, but not have anything to do with DNA. So I found the same person in this wonderful tree. Where Where's my cursor? That would be the private person here. And it does give me her parents' names. And so this was Rochelle's cousin, so we're not connected to this side of the family, only to this one. And there was some really good-looking research, at least done on this German line, and I had a name for the mother, Malzahn. I already thought, oh, that's very Prussian. So we looked at the family view here for Laubner, for the father, and find that, oh, there's Berlin mentioned. This looked really interesting, so I followed up on it, and I pretty quickly determined that the Laubner side of the family was Bavarian and Saxon, so not Prussia. Those parts were never part of Prussia, and I wasn't seeing any Schulzes in it, so I thought, yeah, that's not it, so I need to look at the mother. This is what this bigger tree had on the mother. It had a place of birth. Wonderful. 1926, born in Hasefeldstade. Now, if you know where Hamburg is and where Bremen is, the big ports from which immigrants left, Stade is right between that. So it's in northwestern Germany, not where we were thinking that Paul Schulze was from. But she had this name that I knew, just because of my experience, was not from there. My mother is from that kind of close there. So there are no Malzahns in northwestern Germany. That is not a name you see in northwestern Germany for people who actually have traditional family there. So somehow she got the surname from somewhere else. So 1926. Now, Germany has privacy laws that mean that you cannot get someone's birth record until 110 years after their death. And you cannot get anyone's marriage record until 80 years after the marriage. But I contacted the city archive in Stade and asked them for the birth record. I thought, oh, maybe someone's just going to give it to me. And she got back to me and said, I'm sorry, I cannot share this information with you, but I can tell you something about the parents, because she was being helpful, and she said, these are the parents' names because their marriage was more than 80 years ago. And she gave me their names and told me that they had been married in Kiel, which is somewhere, was a naval base in World War I. And in 1916 was when they were married. And I thought, oh, okay, so we're military. So I had the parents' names. And I could have gotten the parents' marriage record from Kiel, but I didn't need to. Her father's name was Karl Gustav Reinhold Malzahn, and she was able to tell me this. He was born in Soldin, in the state of Brandenburg, which is east of Berlin. And the mother's name was Anna Margareta Harms, and she was born in Stade, the town we're looking at. So Harms, again, that can't be connected to Schulze. That's typical Northwest German. Somehow her husband, she must have met him in Kiel and came to live with her then, but he was from an area of interest. So here's our map again. That big red star, that's Soldin. See, this is Berlin. This is where Paul Schulze lived at the time his son was born. This is where Karl Malzahn was from. I look in family search, and yeah, Soldin, the actual regular church records are gone, lost in the war. This area saw a lot of destruction, but the military records exist. And I thought, oh, well, we know we're looking for military people, so we'll look at the military records. And I got in, looked at 1873, and within a minute, I found the birth record here. Paul Georg Otto Schulze, born in September 1873. Father is Karl Schulze. He's a sergeant in the military. I thought, oh, this looks really good. I don't know how he's related to Malzahn yet, but because Malzahn was from there and I suspected the relationship, all I had to do was look at this parish record in this church book, and I found a very good-looking match. Not proof yet. This is German handwriting, by the way, that I deal with every day. I know it's scary. this is a really bad example. It's not always this bad. This is the marriage record of the parents. Karl Schulze married, and it tells you where he was born and everything. He married Caroline Berger. And it says that Caroline's father was Karl Friedrich Berger. He was a day laborer in Soldin. And if I go back to, I forgot to show this, if I went back to the baptism record, the sponsor, the godparent, was Bertha Berger. Oh, okay. Found out more about the family. Now I'm looking for the Malzahns. I find the Malzahns in civil registration record. This is a civil marriage record. And again, if I talk to German researchers, this makes more sense here. But where I have the arrow down there, it tells me that Bertha Berger, who married Wilhelm Malzahn, he married Bertha Berger, is also the daughter of Friedrich Berger. So Bertha Malzahn is the sister. I should show you the next slide. That would help. Here's my test taker, Barbara. Here's the guy we're looking for, Paul. His mother is Caroline Berger. Her sister is Bertha Berger. And she married a Malzahn. Here's the lady we found where the nice person gave me the information, and here's the match. So that's a third cousin once removed, right? I plug it into DNA Painter. And yes, it works out. Barbara, Friedrich Berger, and one of the records told me the wife's name also, Wilhelmine Fest. And then if I trace it down here, this is the match that we had in Ancestry. They match at 30 centimorgans, which falls very nicely into this expected range. The average is 48. Now, we didn't know for sure if Wilhelmine was both Bertha and Caroline's mother, so I also ran it on this side. It could be a half-sibling, comes about the same. So it works. The DNA matches. Am I done? No, I'm going to check out a few more things. So now I have an exact birth date for Paul. So the first thing I do, it's actually not the first thing I have listed, but the first thing I did was check World War I casualty lists with his exact name, with the 3 given names at the exact birth record. Yep, died in Belgium in 2010, in 1916. That was the proof where I felt like, okay, now I know I have it right. We have, since we found this, built a pedigree with up to 7 generations. On one line, we're back to 1680. His killed in action record and place of burial in Belgium. We found his university records, information on the roommates he lived with, his employment records at 2 land surveyors' office in what is now Poland. I was there last year to visit the archives and found just the most amazing records. I found records on his father's conduct in office, his superiors talking about the work he did, how reliable he was, all good stuff. And some of the other records were not good, but luckily I had good news to report. Father's promotion. On the Schulze line, one of the ancestors is Benninghaus, and it turns out they were really big in the ironworks business throughout Germany as weapon making was growing in the 1700s. And they came from the Alsace and moved east and were kind of the leaders of these new factories. And I was actually able to trace the original Benninghaus back to, guess what, Solingen. For my other case, German Center of Blade Making. This is amazing what came from this. It was a terrible headache to have these wrong matches and just not getting anywhere with the other ones, but boy, was it worth it. So in summary, better research means you're better able to evaluate the DNA-based research. You have to do thorough paper research before and while you're using the DNA. Do your homework on all ancestors of the test taker so you also know what you can eliminate. Understand the history and political geography of the ancestral region. Use maps. Goes without saying, be well organized from the start. I guess genealogists are, hopefully. Expect dead ends. What I had very little to tell me if I was looking at the right, all I could do is the ones that look like I can research them and I have no reason to eliminate them. That's all I had. It's okay to look for the path of least resistance, like I did with the Chicago thing. I had to say, no, we'll try something else first. And keep the unknown in mind. There are many possible DNA relationships, misattributed parentage. You just don't know. People who have something in their tree where sometimes you can see, oh, this can't be, but sometimes it looks good and it might not be. So you don't trust other people's research, just take it as your guide. It's more likely to work if you have few German lines in your tree and in matches trees. We did not have that with the Schulze case, but that helps. If you have ethnicities you can rule out, like with the Jewish. This is a big one. If the genetic distance between the test taker and the search subject is 4 or less generations, because the further back you get, the more difficult it gets to not just find the right matches because you have thousands of matches at 10 centimorgans, but also when you get that far back in history, you're dealing with less useful records. So the combination can mean that it doesn't work. If paper research has identified a specific German state or region, that's helpful. Very common surnames make it more difficult, although in this case it worked. Yes, same thing, immigration before 1860. The records are not as good, the genetic distance is larger. I would not try this with Pennsylvania German immigrants. Would not work. If you have all German ancestry, especially if they're all from the same region, that can be very difficult. And as I said very early on today, if you have early American ancestry and other lines, you have to be very, very patient because you have thousands of matches that have nothing to do with what you're looking for, but they're there. Endogamous populations, if you're doing Jewish research, for example, that's a whole other story, and I'm sure you know a lot about it, but that can make your estimates be off. Wow, that took forever.
Thank you very much. And we will take questions if anybody has questions. If you have a question, raise your hand and let me bring the microphone to you before you ask the question.
Do you find with the German research that you get back to the 30 Years' War, and is it really tough to go back beyond that point because of the destruction that occurred, or do you have any comments on that?
Yes, so we rarely find church records from before that time because so much was destroyed, and about a third of the population, in some areas up to 70% of the population perished in the 30 Years' War. So 30 Years' War is 1618 to 1648, major destructive event in Central Europe. So church records, in most cases, 1650 and later, if you're lucky, if they were destroyed at some other point. The way to get even farther back, depending on where you are, can be through notarial records, such as, this is hard for me to do in English because I do this in German all the time. For example, serfs, if they were trading serfs, if owners of serfs or owners of property, where sometimes you'll find records of how they traded serfs. And if they were kept in like a monastery in an archive, those records still exist. Sometimes they're tax records from much earlier than the 30 Years' War. There can be city records. Again, it depends on the area. But what's been fun over the last few years to see is that more and more German archives are putting indexes online. So I can, for some areas, I can go to that state archive, like the State Archive of Hessen is wonderful, and I can just put in some keywords, town name, and it might bring up what they have there in that area, and then I can investigate. So it is possible to, yeah.
So if you know a place, I can't laugh. If you know a place that might be a clue, very often can you find out additional information just by writing them a letter?
If I don't have records to available to me here?
Yeah.
Yes. The place I would, and again, Poland, anything that's in Poland today and Russia today, there are extra hurdles. If it's still in Germany today, what I'm going to look for usually is there a local genealogical or historical society? Sometimes there are groups in these smaller German towns that are really active and there's someone there who knows everything. So I will, sometimes that's how I've found information, and also that the person I'm looking for, someone already has all the research. And so that local genealogical societies can be great resource. But I see lots of people ask, like in Facebook forums, I'm going to my ancestral town, how do I find someone who can tell me about it? If there are records here that you can access here, it's probably easier to do that than to try to do it there. They're not in the churches anymore in most cases.
How about hospitals?
Hospital records. I don't know. I would write to a city archive and ask them. I think that's what, if there's something more unique like that, I would probably find the city archive and write personally to that archivist and see if they have any advice. And again, it varies how busy they are, how well they're staffed, whether they get back to you, but sometimes you can get good information.
So you talked about the sort of instability of Germany over time. So if you have a person that's identified in the U.S. Census, a particular state from Germany that they're from, how stable are those states geographically, and how representative do you find individuals identifying a state of origin and that corresponding to that geographic area? Unless you know the time of immigration or those things.
So are you talking about U.S. records
So
that
in
would
the U.S.
say,
record, identifying a state of origin.
yes.
So how stable are those states of origin?
It's really, if you know the history, then the U.S. record can give you a really good clues. So it might say Germany after 1871, but then if you look at the 1870 census, it might say Hessen-Darmstadt. And if you go back to the 1850s and it says something else, sometimes that'll really, if you look at what happened historically to that area, sometimes that'll really allow you to narrow down where to look. But that's not really what you're asking, right?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
Because in some cases I find Germany, some cases I do find the state of origin, but it sort of varies on an individual and by different families as well.
And every historical record is also just as good as the informant or the person taking the information. So there's plenty census records. There are so many errors. I mean, Baden and Bavaria, very interchangeable. To if the person who's writing the record doesn't really care or doesn't know. Although Baden and Bavaria, they have a border in those days, and Bavaria, there was a part of Bavaria that's no longer in Bavaria today that borders on Baden. So sometimes there can be a clue. Again, you need to look at maps and you need to look at what was happening at that time the record was taken and how did it change by the next time the place is mentioned. And sometimes it's kind of sometimes there's hidden information that if you look, you can find. Sometimes it's just errors.
My question is about Königsberg.
the difficulties of what happened after the Second World War. What are your challenges in trying to find people who are from East Prussia, from the Königsberg area? And have you been able to go there and locate anything of value when it comes to German ancestry?
There are quite a few organizations that are really devoted to preserving East Prussian history. There's one group that just puts up, have you found the one, forget what it's called, but has old postcards and pictures and is gathering those? What has survived in East Prussia in terms of church records and directories of cities, Königsberg has a few, is all available for research online. I've done quite a bit research in East Prussia, and it's really pretty gratifying. There's a lot you can find online. But some things are gone, not just in World War II. World War I, they were invaded by Russians, and a lot was destroyed then. So there's these blank spots on the map where it's hard to find things. I have not used DNA for that yet. I have a client for whom I've done some very extensive East Prussia research, and I've tried to get him to do DNA, and he's just not there yet, but I would like that. Yeah, Königsberg, there are quite a few also German genealogical societies that are devoted to that area. There's quite a bit I could share with you.
Anybody?
Oh, there was here.
Yeah, this problem with the changing in the names of the countries or the provinces or dukedoms or whatever. I had one of my grandfathers. We found records that it said that he was from Gotha, Bavaria. So everybody took that to mean that it was a town, which we could never find. But then later, I realized there was a little dukedom called Gotha that sat right on the Bavarian border that was incorporated into Bavaria later, and that's really where it was. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, right, exactly like the way you were describing.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So, yes, and Google's your friend. I mean, if you have a weird name, like it says, it's Gotha in German, it says Gotha, Bavaria, and then you just think that's something strange that someone wrote, and maybe it's a town. Don't guess, try Googling it. And you might be surprised that you find the history of a place like that, and you find maps, and you go, oh. But yeah. That's in that area where all these little Saxon...
I was going to ask you where you got that map that you used in the advertisement for your talk.
That wasn't me.
I got that map. And
That's one of the best maps I've ever seen for that complexity of central Germany.
It's from Wikipedia.
Well, I don't know. I've looked at a lot of maps on Wikipedia, but I've never seen that one. That's a good one.
If there's no further questions, I thank you for coming on this rainy night, and hopefully see you June and July.